Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is the new Triumph Scrambler 400X, part of Triumph's new entry-level 400cc range. Now, I've already done a video on these bikes and gone into a bit more depth about their context, how they came about, all that kind of thing, and you can watch that by clicking the link you can see now. But I wanted to do a standalone video on the Scrambler because I think there's enough to set this bike apart to merit some further exploration, and also to ask the question, which is actually the better of these two new Triumph 400s, the Scrambler or the Speed 400, the more road-oriented bike of the two. Just to recap on the sort of fundamentals, the similarities as it were, they're both built around this brand new liquid-cooled 400cc 40 horsepower single-cylinder engine. They both use the same kind of frame and fundamental construction and share a lot of the components. A lot of these have been tweaked for the Scrambler though, so we'll start at the front. These rather lovely looking gold upside down big piston forks, they've got a bit more travel now, 150mm. At the back, again, a bit more travel, 150mm travel over the 130mm you get on the Speed 400. We've also got a bigger 19-inch front wheel for the Scrambler. And then there's a few of the other bits have changed as well. So inevitably the seat's a bit taller. It's 835mm as opposed to 790 on the Speed 400. There's a bit more wheelbase, about 41mm I think, and the bars are quite a lot wider, so 900mm plus. So in theory it should feel like a slightly bigger bike. It's also about 9 kilos heavier at 179 kilos. So possibly of the two bikes this might suit the bigger rider a bit more. They've also repositioned the pegs here, so it's intended to be more comfortable to ride whether you're seated or standing up and riding off-road. And that's quite an interesting indicator for me because actually I think this baby Scrambler might be a bit more off-road oriented than the Scrambler 900 big brother. I mean, it's got more travel for a start and a slightly more kind of contemporary setup. The Scrambler 900 has that twin shock rear end and things like that, but then of course remember that bike used to be called the Street Scrambler, so in that context it makes a bit more sense. In terms of the competition, I've been kind of number crunching this against things like the Royal Enfield Scram 411, and when you put it against bikes like that, you know, the kind of old school air-cooled single cylinder middleweights, it looks pretty competitive. Okay, it's quite a bit more expensive, you know, maybe £1,000 or so more expensive, but the Royal Enfield's only got 27 horsepower or so, and best will in the world, it's quite a bit more crude in the way it's built. And I think this is where Triumph has been really clever with the way it's positioned these bikes, because you could put this bike alongside a much more expensive Fantic Caballero Scrambler 500 for instance, and I think it would more than hold its own in style terms. Maybe not quite as off-road oriented, I don't know, you'd have to put that to the test, but you know, in terms of posing power, it's certainly the equal of some much fancier and more expensive bikes. So all of that looks really good. But is this better than the Speed 400? There's only one way to find out, isn't there? Okay, so here we are on the Scrambler 400X version of the new Triumph 400 range. Now hopefully you've seen my video on the Speed 400 already, give you a bit of context, but as I said, there's enough about this bike I think to merit a bit more exploration, and I wanted to particularly find out what the differences in the size of this bike make to the feel of it. Now you'll have heard me say that the Speed 400 was on the Diddy side, which is fine for what these bikes are about, but just because you're riding on an A2 license and maybe a younger rider doesn't necessarily mean you're a short ass, does it? So young riders can be taller riders as well, and maybe the kind of the extra size of this Scrambler compared with the Speed is just enough to cater for taller folk. So just for reference, I am a smidge under 6 foot, and as I say, I found the Speed 400 fun but a little on the small side. So let's just go over how this bike differs in makeup. Of course, at the heart it's the same 400cc 40 horsepower liquid cooled single cylinder engine, a very modern engine as we've discussed previously, and a version of the same frame, although it's been adapted for the Scrambler. So steel backbone frame, same aluminium swing arm at the back, more wheelbase, another 40mm of wheelbase, partly to accommodate that bigger 19-inch front wheel, wider bars, repositioned pegs, all that kind of stuff. So a few differences, and I would say from kind of first impression that it definitely feels a little bit chunkier and more substantial than the Speed, and that's no bad thing. And you kind of get that in the way it rides as well, so maybe due to the changes in geometry, also that bigger front wheel. It's a more physical ride because you have to overcome more gyroscopic effect to get it turned in, so the steering is a bit more physical. You don't just point it on its nose like you do the Speed. You know, you actually have to kind of give the bars a meaningful heave to get them to turn in. But overall there's that same sense of kind of friendliness and kind of ease of use that you get from the Speed version. Seat height's a little bit higher, 835 over 790, but as Triumph points out, seat height is about more than just the distance off the ground. It's to do with how wide the bike is as well, and being a single cylinder, the Scrambler 400X is nice and skinny. It's also pretty light at 179 kilos, so that all helps tone down how threatening it might otherwise feel to a less experienced rider. So that's all good, and it's probably a bit more comfortable than the Speed as well. That extra suspension travel, it's basically the same forks and shock setup with that piggyback rear shock and the upside down big piston forks. That's going to be good on kind of bumpy city streets, speed humps, potholes and stuff like that. Not that there's many of them on these lovely smooth Spanish roads that we're riding on at the moment. And I reckon as well the upright riding position is going to score well for people riding this bike into town. It gives you a bit more visibility through traffic when you're filtering and stuff like that, doesn't it? So just a bit more comfy as well, you're not resting on your wrists. I mean, the Speed 400 is hardly a kind of cafe racer in its stance, but just being a bit more upright, I guess it's like the equivalent of being in an SUV or a crossover in the cars, isn't it? People like being more upright. But basically, this bike's all about bringing the whole Scrambler hipster cool to a more attainable level. And at just over £5,500, it certainly does that. And it will make you look very cool, obviously, when you ride to the local hipster coffee emporium. But can it actually cut it off-road? Well, luckily enough, Triumph has also laid on a bit of a gravel track for us to ride on. So let's give that a go. So that's the Scrambler on the road. Let's give it a bit of a go off-road as well. This is my first time off-road on a motorbike, so bear with me. No heroics here. I do a lot of mountain bikings, but I'm not sure how much this translates to a motorbike. But it does test this theory that the Scrambler, the baby Scrambler, is actually a true Scrambler, and maybe actually even a little bit more off-road credible than the big Scrambler 900. I mean, I will admit, I've got no real benchmark here to compare this against any other type of Scrambler, but as I said in the walk around, there's 150mm of suspension travel on this, which is a reasonable upgrade from the... Sorry, just concentrating there. 130mm of the speed version, so we got some decent tyres as well, and obviously repositioned pegs to help with the off-road ability. So I've got to say for first taste of off-road, it seems rather a lot of fun. And the idea that you could take this little bike kind of out into the wild, it does give you a bit more, to show there's more ability in this 400 than perhaps the speed, so a bit more versatility. And it shows that, yeah, the baby Scrambler is a true Scrambler. Right, so there we go. That is the Triumph Scrambler 400X, and a very fun few hours riding it, both on and off the road. That bit of gravel was a little bonus I wasn't expecting, but it was a lot of fun and just showed the extra breadth of capability that this Scrambler has got over the regular speed 400. Which would I choose out of the two? And is this the better one? I don't know. There's a lot to think about. If you're a taller rider, then the Scrambler is probably the pick, just because it has just that little bit more room about the stretch, the reach in it, and the standover and all that kind of thing. Just makes you feel like you're on a slightly more substantial bike, which, as I say, if you're a taller rider, that just it feels less like riding a kid's bike, let's put it that way. So that's quite attractive. Also, if you ride a lot in the city, the upright riding position just gives you a better view when you're filtering through traffic and all that kind of thing, so a bit more comfortable as well, perhaps. So those kind of things, they definitely count in its favour. Against that, the speed is probably the nicer bike if you're riding in the twisties, a bit more pointy on the front end, feels a bit more agile, that kind of thing. So horses for courses, but I'm really impressed with this bike. It really successfully channels the spirit of the bigger Scrambler 900 and 1200. And to be honest, even though it costs, well, you know, not quite half, but near as damn it, it doesn't seem to be left wanting in terms of quality. You know, just look at the fixtures and fittings, on just these little bits here. The engine looks really cool, quilted saddle, these kind of bits and bobs like that. This doesn't look like a bike that costs a little bit over £5 grand. It could cost quite a lot more, and I think compared with some of the fancier, more boutique rivals, this stands as a cool Scrambler in its own right, and a quality bike in its own right, never mind just an affordable one. As to which I'd choose over this or the speed, I don't know, I'm going to have to think about it some more. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, hit like and subscribe, tick the bell for further notifications, and feel free to ask me any questions in the comments and I'll get back to you there. Stay tuned for more from @midlife crisis motorcyclist, and I'll see you for the next one. Ride safe.